day that you are given the opportunity to get rid of something that you feel has been holding you back. And it can be anything. A fear of death, a fear of flying, of illness, a fear of your next door neighbor, a fear of a heartbreak. It could be the opportunity of your lifetime. Would you take it? Let me tell you a story. In 2004, there was a production, a Balinese production of The Tempest performed right here in New York City. Now, the conceit behind this production was about the Balinese response to the terrorist bombings of a disco in 2002. The United States' response to terrorism had been war. The Balinese response to terrorism was art. Right away, they staged these religious ceremonies in every single village, filled with music and dance and special offerings to encourage the islanders to look deep within themselves, that they might experience and transcend the loss, the fear, the hate. In Bali, the terrorists were brought to justice within 1 year. So this New York production of The Tempest is featuring a mostly Balinesian cast, and including the great actor Yoman Katra, a full gamelan orchestra, shadow puppets and masks, and the Indonesian check-check dance, and 5 actors from the United States. And the play is about this man Prospero, who's this magician. And he uses his magical powers to punish and torment his enemies. And the climax of this play is when Prospero renounces his powers so that he can forgive. I am asked to play Prospero. I laugh and I say no. And then I think, no one is ever going to ask me to do something like this again. And so I go back and I say yes. And so we rehearse at La Mama downtown, and it's wild because I have to learn this entirely new way of performing with my toes ticking straight up and these grand gestures, and I'm wearing this magnificent mask. And Yoman says that the climax of the play is going to be a ritual of exorcism. And so on the day that we're going to do this, I'm standing in the room, and I am surrounded by the entire cast, and it's like some 30 people. And I'm standing there, and Yoman comes up to me, and he says, go to something you want to get rid of, think about it, and give it a way out. Now, when somebody says this to you, the very first thing that comes to your mind is it. Right? You know right away. At least I did. I knew instantly. I knew that I wanted to get rid of my more than 20 years of grief over my father's death. I was 16. He was only 41. I watched it happen. I couldn't save him, and I'd never gotten over it. And so, but the thing is about this grief is that it, by over 20 years, had become a part of me. It defined me. If I let it go, I didn't want to be happy. I just didn't want to be sad anymore. If it were rid of, what would be left? And Yoman sees this, and he says, that's it, get that out. And so I'm standing there in the middle of his circle, surrounded by people waiting patiently. And I don't know what to do, I'm not Balinese, how do you do an exorcism? And I can't really fake it in front of these experts, so I'm standing there, and and Yoman says, you have to have courage. And, this is the whole point of this production. It's Prospero's journey. And so I take a deep breath and, but I am so resistant. And then ultimately, it is my intolerance of my resistance that pushes me over the edge, and I face it. And I'm not alone. But it's only me who's fighting with myself. And then I can't fight anymore, and I just give up. And then this amazing energy just goes up through my body and crashes out of the top of my head, and it's love. It's love. Love is the climax of the play. And now for the denouement. So the day after this, I wake up in the morning with what appears to be a spider bite on my leg. And so within hours, it's getting more painful and swollen, so I go to the doctor. And he treats it, and he says, if it gets any worse, you should go to the hospital. So I go home, and it's 100 degrees in Brooklyn, and I am under a down comforter shivering. And my roommate comes home, and she freaks because my entire leg is now infected. So she drags me to the emergency room. They take me to trauma, and when they wake me up, they say, "We've saved your leg, but your roommate saved your life." I had a flesh-eating bacterial disease in my leg. Now, I don't know how I got it, and the doctors don't know either. And they keep asking me all these questions like, have you been to a third world country? No. Have you been to a jungle? No. And I think, well, I did have a Balinese exorcism last night. And he looks at me and he's like, no, that's not it. Now, this infection resists all kinds of medications. So what happens is they cut it out, and my fever breaks, and I instantly feel better, which is good because I have a show to do. So I go and we do this play, and it's like this dazzling experience. And after the last performance, I wake up the next day, and I have another infection on my thigh. And it's the same thing all over again, except this time I didn't wait. And then it happens 4 more times that fall. And then it's the holiday season, and it's Christmas Eve, and I'm at the airport, and I'm waiting for my mother to come in from Florida. And her plane arrives, and her baggage arrives, but she doesn't. And I find out that right before she boarded the plane in Tampa, someone had put a suitcase behind her, and she had fallen backwards over it and landed on her head and died. Christmas 2004. And so now the infection has gone to my head, and there's nothing that they can do. But there is stuff that I can do. So I make a will. I create a medical directive. I get rid of everything. I donate my body to science. I ask my doctor, can you give me a time frame? Do I need to pay my rent? So my doctor has recently met this infectious disease specialist at St. Vincent's Hospital. And he was one of the guys who was at the forefront of the HIV virus. And so I go to see him, and I walk in, and he takes one look at my face, and he says, I know exactly what that is. I was one of the first people to carry community-acquired MRSA. Now, regular MRSA usually only did this much damage to people who had compromised immune systems, and now the bug had jumped into the healthy population. I was dying, but I was healthy. And it had colonized into the back of my head. And ever the perfect hostess, I had been infecting myself. So he puts me on this experimental drug treatment, and about a month later, I get a call. I've tested negative. I'm going to live. I'm alone. I'm broke. I've given away everything. I've said goodbye. I have no job. I'm not going to die, but I don't have a life. So my friends are asking me, what are you going to do? I have no idea. But in the end, it didn't really matter, because my life, it came to me. I'm standing on the street one day, literally wondering which way to go. And this guy comes tearing down the avenue on a kick scooter. And our eyes meet, and he pulls up to the curb, and he says, hey. And I said, hey. No. I have survived an illness. I have survived a death. I cannot survive a heartbreak. And this guy, he's dangerous. I want nothing to do with him, nothing to do. So of course, that's all I can think about. I try to avoid him, but he is everywhere, and I keep telling myself, don't do this. So I see him, and I'm like, you know what, I'm in a big rush, I gotta go. And then I end up standing there talking to him for 3 hours on the corner. I'm walking home, engorged after a big feast. He sees me, you hungry? Starving. I walk out of my house with my fingers crossed, praying that he not be there, but I am checking my makeup. This is not me being cute. I was really concerned. If this kept going the way that it was going to go, it could end up being really, really bad. But then I think of the way that I can save myself from him. I sit him down, and I tell him everything that's happened. And I spare absolutely not one detail. And I end up seducing him. He's into me because of this, not in spite of it. And he didn't know me before. He's knowing me now at my worst. And it's okay. But the thing is, he just wasn't what I had been looking for. I'm a writer. He doesn't read. So one day I'm reading The New Yorker, and I laugh about something. And he asks me what I'm laughing about. And so I tell him what I'm laughing about, and I can tell he has no idea why this is funny. And then he looks at me and he says, "I love you, Michaela." And I realized I had been looking for someone who was into the same things that I was. And here I had found someone who was into me. He has a daughter that lives in Seattle, and they missed each other very, very much. And so he wanted to be with her, and so he asked me to move to Seattle. And I didn't know anything about Seattle, so I said, okay. So I'm looking through Craigslist for a house, and I have no idea. And so then I see this little yellow house, and I say, that one, that's the house. And so we rent this house sight unseen. And then we get in the truck, and we're driving across country, and I'm reading these signs, Pennsylvania, Ohio, next rest stop, 20 miles. And then I find myself looking for signs. Like, am I making a really big mistake? And who is this guy? So I just don't know what I'm going to do. And I really, really wish that my mother were with me, because she knew me. And she would tell me what to do. You should know that my mother's name was Rose Sullivan. Our house in Seattle is on 8th Avenue, nestled between the streets, Rose and Sullivan. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Everybody's father dies. Everybody experiences illness. Everybody's mother dies. Every heart can break. Why not me? All of my worst fears had happened, even fears that I didn't know I had happened. And with each misfortune, I felt myself falling deeper and deeper into this hole when, in fact, I was clawing my way out. You can't get rid of fear, but it can be a really good supporting player, but not the star of your life. Resilience resides in retrospection, a cousin of regret. What would you be rid of? What would set your spirit free? For me, resilience, it wasn't in the fight. It was in the surrender. Thank you.